Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to be looking at Hume's argument against miracles. So in this video, we're going to start by just reviewing that argument for miracles. And then we're going to dive into sort of Hume's strategy for attacking this argument. We'll look at Hume's goal, his balancing principle, and what he thinks the source of our evidence for miracles would be, and what he thinks the source of our evidence against miracles would be. Then we'll develop that into what I'm going to call Hume's balance argument. And then we'll look at Hume's specific reasons to doubt the testimony or reports of miracles. All right, so the argument for miracles says that some miracles have happened. So there have been some violations of laws of nature, or there have been some events that we don't have natural explanations for. Well, if those kind of events have occurred, then God exists. We need to posit God in order to explain how those events could be caused. Thus, God exists. So let's take a look at a passage where Hume, in his own words, describes what he thinks he accomplishes with this kind of reasoning in this essay about miracles. And in the passage, you'll see Hume's sort of disdain for superstition and religion really does come out in this passage. So he says, "Nothing is so convenient as a decisive argument of this kind, which must at least silence the most arrogant bigotry and superstition and free us from their impertinent solicitations. I flatter myself that I have discovered an argument of a like nature which, if just, will, with the wise and learned, be an everlasting check to all kinds of superstitious delusion and consequently be useful as long as the world endures. For so long, I presume, will the account of miracles and prodigies be found in all history, sacred and profane." Hume claims that the rational person, when there's evidence both for and against a claim, the rational attitude is to proportion your belief to the evidence. So the idea is you take the evidence for, the evidence against, you put on a scale, you balance them against one another, and you believe whatever has the stronger evidence, but you don't believe it fully. You believe it to the extent that it balances out in that favor. So if there's only slightly stronger evidence on this scale for the event, then you should believe it, but only slightly. You shouldn't fully believe it. If there's slightly stronger evidence against it, then you shouldn't fully disbelieve it, but you should slightly disbelieve it. If there's really strong evidence against something, then you should have a really strong belief, even if it's not sort of 100% certain. All right, so then we need to consider then what's the evidence that's possible for the existence of a miracle on that side of the scale. Well, Hume holds that our supposed evidence for miracles comes from various reports, from the testimony of others. So we read about these miracles, we hear about these miracles, and he specifically had in mind the miracles attested to within sort of religious scripture, specifically Christianity. He says, look, our evidence is coming from those reports that we are passed down through scripture. And so he says, it will be sufficient to observe that our assurance of any argument of this kind is derived from no other principle than our observation of the veracity of human testimony and of the usual conformity of facts to the reports of witnesses. It being a general maxim that no objects have any discoverable connection together and that all the inferences which we can draw from one to another are founded on our experience of their constant and regular conjunction, it is evident that we ought not make an exception to this maxim in favor of human testimony, whose connection with any event seems in itself as little necessary as any other. So in other words, the truth of any testimony is a matter of fact. So when we consider the idea of a person giving testimony and the idea of that testimony being true, there's no contradiction in a person giving false testimony. So the truth of someone's testimony is not a relation of ideas. It's a matter of fact. Well, the only evidence for matters of fact must come from experience. And so in order to sort of be justified in believing that someone's testimony is true, that evidence must come from our past experience with people telling the truth. So the more often that someone says something and then we find out that it's true, the more evidence we have that human testimony is reliable. The plain consequence is, and it is a general maxim worthy of our attention, that no testimony is sufficient to establish a miracle unless the testimony is of such a kind that its falsehood would be more miraculous than the fact which it endeavors to establish. So the only way we can be assured of a miracle is if the evidence in favor of the truth of a person's testimony, so our past experience provides more evidence that human testimony is true, then we have past experience that the miracle did not occur. So if the falsehood of his testimony would be more miraculous than the event which he relates, then, and not until then, can he pretend to command my belief or opinion. So if someone tells me that a person has been raised from dead, the idea is I can only be justified in believing them. There has to be more experience supporting the truth of human testimony than experiences supporting the claim that people don't rise from the dead. So, what evidence then is there against the existence of a miracle? Well, remember, a miracle is a violation of a law of nature, according to Hume. Well, something is only considered a law of nature if it has always occurred in our past experience. Thus, all our past experience gives us evidence that this kind of event does not occur. So if we really do have reason to think something's a law of nature, that means all of our own past experience sort of confirms that that kind of event sort of does not occur. So it's a law of nature that human beings sort of do not rise from the dead. The reason that's a law of nature, why I think that's a law of nature, is because all of my past experiences confirm that fact. And so, even if people always told the truth in our past experience, that would not be enough evidence for the miracle so as to outweigh the evidence against it. Because all of my experience confirms that people don't rise from the dead. So even if all my experience were to confirm that people tell the truth, I sort of have equal weights on each side of the scale. I have an equal amount of evidence for the truth of the testimony and an equal amount of evidence that the miracle didn't occur. So this gives rise to Hume's balance argument. So miracles are violations of the laws of nature. Well, a law of nature is a regularity that has always held in our past experience. That something has always held true in our past experience, that's the strongest possible experiential evidence we could have for any claim. Thus, the experiential evidence in favor of the truth of the testimony or report of a miracle could never be stronger than the experiential evidence against miracles. Now, if people always told the truth in our past experience, it might be equal, but it could never be stronger. So experience is the only evidence we have for the truth of testimony. So we can't use our thought alone. So it's not a priori that testimony must be true. Experience is the only evidence we can have. And thus, our evidence always makes the falsehood of the testimony at least as likely as the event reported. And we are only justified in believing testimony if its falsehood is less likely than the reported event itself. Thus, we can never be justified in believing some testimony or report that a miracle happened. So Hume points out that his balance argument assumes that the truth of human testimony is perfectly observed in our past experience. He says, even in that best case scenario, we wouldn't be justified in believing that miracles have occurred because essentially the scales would end up being equal. But, he says, if that assumption, if we're not in the best case scenario regarding human testimony, then the evidence in favor of miracles is not equal. It's actually much weaker than the evidence against the miracle. And he says, look, that assumption about human testimony is clearly false. So, our past experience with untruthful testimony gives us even further reason to doubt any report of miracles. Let's look at these reasons we have for doubting the reports of miracles. So the first reason that Hume gives is he says, look, we have plenty of past experience with persons telling us false things. Maybe they lied, maybe they misspoke, maybe they were tricked. He says, there's not to be found in all history any miracle attested by a sufficient number of persons of such unquestionable good sense, education, and learning as to secure us against all delusion in themselves, of such undoubted integrity as to place them beyond all suspicion of any design to deceive others. So yet again, we have plenty of experience with people deceiving us, of such credit and reputation in the eyes of mankind as to have a great deal to lose in case of their being detected in any falsehood, and at the same time attesting facts performed in such a public manner, and so celebrated a part of the world as to render the detection unavoidable, all which circumstances are requisite to give us a full assurance in the testimony of people. Another reason, he says, surprise and wonder are pleasurable experiences that can often overrule our common sense and get us to believe things, like miracles, that we shouldn't. So these emotions also make us more likely to share reports of miracles. So he says, the passion of surprise and wonder arising from miracles, being an agreeable emotion, gives a sensible tendency towards the belief of those events from which it is derived. So the idea is, look, when someone tells us about a miracle, when you hear a story about some miraculous event, it sort of stirs our imagination. It makes us sort of surprised. We sort of feel wonder, we feel awe, and that sort of awe we feel at sort of contemplating that kind of event makes us feel good. And insofar as it makes us feel good, we want to keep that pleasurable feeling. And so we want to keep that idea around that gave us that pleasurable feeling, which means we will sort of tend to believe that idea. Even though usually, since it goes against all our past experience, if we were to rely on sort of our past experience as a guide to the future, we would essentially say that this did not occur. But since it gives us this pleasurable experience, we sort of violate our own rules about how to reason, is the idea here. And this goes so far that even those who cannot enjoy this pleasure immediately, nor can believe those miraculous events of which they are informed, yet love to partake of the satisfaction at second hand or by rebound, and place a pride and delight in exciting the admiration of others. So he says, even among people who aren't sort of taken in by this pleasurable emotion of awe or wonder, so as to believe these reports of miracles, they get pleasure from sort of repeating the stories to others, to making them sort of feel this awe and inspiration. The third reason he gives, he says, look, reports of miracles tend to come from less educated cultures or times. And as such, it becomes more likely that what they witnessed had a natural explanation that they just didn't understand. So the idea is, insofar as these reports seem to come from past times where people didn't understand as much about nature, it becomes more and more likely that what they said was wrong, that they just sort of didn't understand what was happening. And so he says, it forms a strong presumption against all supernatural and miraculous relations that they are observed chiefly to abound among ignorant and barbarous nations. Now here's one of my favorite passages from him. He says, look, it's strange, a judicious reader is apt to say, upon the perusal of these wonderful historians, that such prodigious events never happened in our days. But it is nothing strange, I hope, that men should lie in all ages. So he says, isn't it just a little bit weird that you see all these reports of miracles happening all the time in the past when you read sort of scripture, but you never see one yourself? You sort of don't hear very many of your sort of friends sort of talk about it. So today, miracles seem to be much less common. Why would that be? The last reason he gives is he says, look, the reports of miracles from conflicting religions will end up undermining one another. So he says, it's impossible that the religions of ancient Rome or Turkey, of Siam, of China, should all of them be established on any solid foundation. Every miracle, therefore, pretended to have been wrought in any of these religions, and all of them abound in miracles, as its direct scope is to establish the particular system to which it is attributed, so it has the same force, though more indirectly, to overthrow every other system. In destroying its rival system, it likewise destroys the credit of those miracles on which that system was established, so that all the prodigies of different religions are to be regarded as contrary facts, and the evidence of these prodigies, whether weak or strong, as opposite to each other. So the claim is here, we have all these different religions, and they disagree with one another. Those religions can't all be true. And so, if some miracle gives evidence in favor of one religion, it also thereby gives evidence that the other religions are wrong. And that is, if reports of miracles in one religion give evidence in favor of it, then similarly we should say reports of miracles in other religions gives evidence of it, and similarly it gives evidence against the other religion, and thereby against its sort of miracles. And so these, whether miracles, reports of miracles, whether they provide weak evidence or strong evidence, the fact that we have all these sort of conflicting religions, all sort of reporting miracles, thereby sort of cancel each other out is the idea. All right, so that's all for this video. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.